I'm Norm Macdonald, and now the fake news.
Why was Norm Macdonald fired from Saturday Night Live? If you're a fan of stand-up comedy, you are likely aware that in the world of comedy, Norm Macdonald is one of the most heavily praised comics amongst professional comedians. There are countless comics who cite him as a contemporary and a hero of theirs as well, like Shane Gillis, Mark Normand, Louis C.K., and many more. A lot of comedians even say that Norm Macdonald was their favorite Weekend Update anchor on Saturday Night Live. A lot of fans say this as well. This is for good reason, too. Norm had a spectacular delivery in general, but on Weekend Update, he took it to the next level, and he would often read the most absurd jokes you've ever heard with a dry and deadpan delivery that would make you laugh so hard no sound was coming out.
Beginning in March, DC Comics will change Superman's traditional red and blue costume to a new form-fitting bodysuit. The problem with the old costume? Not gay enough. What the hell's going on in the country?
So if Norm is cherished as one of the most beloved SNL cast members and also one of the funniest comedians on the planet, why on earth would they fire him from Weekend Update and Saturday Night Live entirely? A lot of people think it was all because of the OJ jokes, but it goes a little deeper than that. It was actually because he was a hypocrite. Okay, I'll stop. By the end of the video, you will know the answer to this question. To find out what got Norm fired from Saturday Night Live, we need to first look at the full timeline of events from Norm being hired all the way to Norm being fired. To begin with, Norm Macdonald joined the cast of Saturday Night Live in 1993, and it only took him 1 year before they decided to let him anchor Weekend Update. Norm was notorious for being a master of chaos, so when he was on Weekend Update, he made it glaringly apparent that nothing would be different. I'd go as far as to say that a lot of the jokes Norm would tell would not have gone over as well if it was anybody else telling the joke, not just because of Norm's electric cadence and delivery, but also because of his vicious indifference he had towards the audience after saying a joke, and I mean vicious. It takes a lot of balls to read a joke that makes people mad and then just smirk and stare into the camera lens like, oh well, you don't like my joke? Sounds like it's your problem. And that's what the paper says. He would joke about any and everything you could possibly imagine, whether it was the Clintons murdering people or women not being good drivers. If there was any space for a joke to be made about it, you could bet your sweet ass that Norm would be there to lay into it. The only thing that Norm forgot to tell people in his time on Weekend Update was to subscribe to Nate Roscoe. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this. Anyway, Norm was certainly one of the most controversial Weekend Update hosts in the show's history. He had many instances that could have very well led him into hot water or even possibly led to him being fired, but they didn't. For example, one of the most controversial moments Norm had on the show was on February 24th, 1996, when Norm Macdonald read a joke about the John Lauder sentencing, and he said this.
In Falls City, Nebraska, John Lauder has been sentenced to death for attempting to kill 3 people in what prosecutors called a plot to silence a cross-dressing female who had accused him of rape. Now this might strike some viewers as harsh, but I believe everyone involved in this story should die.
To me, this joke is hilarious, but it was not seen that way by everyone. Apparently, the trans and queer communities came after Saturday Night Live hard and criticized them relentlessly because of this joke from Norm Macdonald, specifically the Transsexual Menace, which is exactly what it sounds like, and also a transgender rights activist organization. They actually went forth and demanded an apology from Saturday Night Live, otherwise they promised to picket and boycott the show. Considering the fact that it was the 1990s and there were like maybe 12 trans people max in existence at the time, you'd think that Saturday Night Live would just ignore this criticism and move on with their lives. Unfortunately, upon reviewing the show, NBC agreed the line was inappropriate and that they should not have aired it. This was a controversial moment that could have easily cost Norm his job, but for some reason nothing came of it. Another controversy Norm was embroiled in was the jokes he told about Michael Jackson. When it was announced that Michael Jackson and Lisa Marie Presley were divorcing, Norm wasted no time before going right for the throat with some brutal jokes. Check it out.
Well, there may be trouble in paradise. Lisa Marie Presley confirmed this week that she and Michael Jackson live in separate residences 50 miles away from each other. Lisa Marie was quoted as saying, "I guess being married to a homosexual pedophile wasn't such a great idea after all."
Once again, Norm could have very well been fired for this as well, but nothing happened. I preface this to demonstrate the point that Saturday Night Live can handle pressure from the public. They've done it many times before. A common idea comedy fans have is that the primary reason Norm was fired from Weekend Update is because of the constant jokes about O.J. Simpson being guilty. If you haven't heard of this, I'll catch you up to speed. One of the executives at NBC goes by the name Don Ohlmeyer. He's an odd-looking duck. O.J. Simpson happened to be a very close friend of Don Ohlmeyer. When the O.J. Simpson trial was taking place, it was Norm's bread and butter to read off as many O.J. Simpson jokes as he possibly could. With Don Ohlmeyer being a good friend of O.J. Simpson, he did not take kindly to Norm's brand of humor and his relentless jokes about the juice being guilty. In fact, when O.J. Simpson was acquitted and found not guilty of murdering that woman and waiter that he absolutely murdered, Don Ohlmeyer made it abundantly clear that since the trial is over, that Norm should just cut it out with the O.J. jokes and leave it alone. Upon hearing this, Norm did what he does best. The day of the acquittal, Norm opens Weekend Update with this joke.
Well, it is finally official. Murder is legal in the state of California.
While this controversy was a part of the equation, it's not the full story as to why Norm was fired. There was a writer at Saturday Night Live named Jim Downey. If you don't know who Jim Downey is, he is this character from Billy Madison.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
So Jim Downey was a writer for SNL, and he wasn't just any writer. He worked directly with the Weekend Update host, specifically with Norm, to write all of these jokes that would have been seen on the Weekend Update segment. Before Norm, comedian Kevin Nealon was doing Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live, and when he was eventually fired, Jim Downey tried really hard to convince the management that Norm would be a great fit for Weekend Update, and he really put in a good word that would eventually lead to Norm getting the job as the anchor for Weekend Update.
Yeah, Norm on Update was one of my successful projects at the show. It was entirely he was my candidate in a very crowded field. Like the second week I met Norm, that he would be a perfect guy if Kevin, left the show or anything.
Then Norm was officially given the role, and while he was there, the O.J. Simpson trial started on January 24th, 1995. This was such a high-profile trial that it was literally on the news every single night while it was happening. The American public was essentially invited into the courtroom with O.J. Simpson and his lawyer, Johnny Cochran, and they would just eat it up. As a result of the case being so high-profile, Jim Downey and Norm Macdonald would constantly write jokes about O.J. Simpson and his seemingly obvious guilt for the crimes he had been accused of. They just thought it was funny, and Jim Downey tells a story about Lorne Michaels, who is the executive producer at SNL, receiving complaints from Don Ohlmeyer about all the O.J. Simpson jokes Norm told.
Every week I would hear occasionally from Lorne, and I knew it was Ohlmeyer calling him to complain, but it was Lorne would go like, how is it that you and Norm seem to be the only people absolutely convinced of OJ's guilt? And I would go like, Lorne, come on.
Jim Downey also went on to say that while the trial was happening, all the way to after the trial had happened, Norm had been doing at least one or two O.J. Simpson jokes for the last 4 seasons of Saturday Night Live. Check it out.
So I'm sure we did an O.J. joke, at least one O.J. joke every day
show, yeah.
From 94, 95, and 96. And then finally...
Then in 1997, Jim Downey and Norm decided to stop telling O.J. jokes to make people think that the jokes were completely over, and then after enough time had passed, they started doing them again little by little. Then O.J. Simpson was at a restaurant, and the owner said his presence was making people uncomfortable, because of the hypocrisy he was guilty of, and O.J. went on to sue the restaurant. This, of course, made headlines, and then Norm told this joke on Weekend Update.
Well, this week, after a Los Angeles restaurant refused to seat him, O.J. Simpson demanded and got $500 in compensation. In addition, the restaurant must now offer separate murderer and non-murderer sections.
Then after this, Don Ohlmeyer got so pissed off that he would go on to reprimand Jim Downey for writing all of these O.J. jokes and feeding them to Norm Macdonald. So Don Ohlmeyer calls Jim Downey into his office, and he says he's going to be fired from the show, and at this point, Norm had no idea what was going on. Then Don Ohlmeyer talks to Norm individually and tells him that the network planned on firing Jim Downey, and they asked him if he was okay with that. And Norm immediately responded and said, "No, I'm not cool with that. If you fire Jim Downey, then I quit." Then Don said to Norm that he's crazy Jim is dead weight on the show, he's writing jokes that are way too mean for the segment, he's not helping Norm, and that Saturday Night Live and Weekend Update would be much better off without him in the writer's room. Norm held his own and said, well, I'm not going to do the show without Jim Downey. If you fire him, you'll have to fire me too. One of the things that made Norm Macdonald so special, besides his ability to be the funniest person in any room he entered, was his integrity and his undying loyalty to his friends. To Norm, doing what he felt was right to him was so effortless. On top of that, he never bragged about doing something noble. He simply did it and then kept to himself. For the longest time, everyone, including myself, thought Norm Macdonald was fired from Weekend Update for telling the O.J. Simpson jokes and refusing to change. But in reality, when Norm was given the chance to throw his friend under the bus to save his own job, he refused to do it. And doing the right thing in this case cost him his dream job on Weekend Update. Not to mention, the only reason we know about this is because Jim Downey did an interview with Conan and David Spade and told us the real reason for the firing, since Norm never did.
The network went to Norm and said, we want to get rid of Jim Downey. You're cool with that, right? He said, no. If you can't fire him, if you fire him, I quit. And he said, well, no, I'm not doing it without him. And he never told me that. If that had been me, that would have been, you bet Norm would have heard.
After being fired initially, Norm went on David Letterman's show and talked to him about it. The whole time he insists that Don Ohlmeyer is a good man and that he was fired for another reason, but he knew the entire time that the reason he lost his job was because they threatened to fire his friend, and he didn't tell anyone that he stuck his neck out. He didn't even tell Jim Downey. When Jim found out that he and Norm got fired at the same time, he thought Norm got fired for something completely different, but it turns out he got fired for doing the right thing, and he literally took this secret with him to the grave. That's one of the most honorable things I've ever heard, and it made me love Norm even more. Even though I own a doghouse, I can't help but admire that deeply closeted gay man even more than I did before. Then to conclude the story, Norm was told he wasn't funny on his way out from Saturday Night Live, and then eventually he was invited back to host Saturday Night Live a year after being fired, and he did the monologue, and we all know how that turned out. And if you don't know what happens, man, are you in for a treat.
When the people here asked me to do the show, I gotta say, I felt kind of weird, I don't know if you remember this, but I used to actually be on this show, They fired me because they said that I wasn't funny, But now, this is the weird part, right? It's only a year and a half later, and now they asked me to host the show. Because a year and a half, let's face it, is not enough time for a dude to learn how to be funny. Then it occurred to me, I haven't gotten funnier. The show has gotten really bad.
All in all, not only was Norm the greatest comedian to ever live, but he was genuinely a man of integrity, loyalty, and honor, and for that, he will always have my respect. I know Norm always thought to himself, what would Nate Roscoe do? But seriously guys, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. This is why Norm Macdonald was fired from Saturday Night Live.
If you guys want to support me in making these videos, the easiest way to do that is to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because that's a free way to support me, to let me know I'm doing a good job with these. And if you want to take your support to the next level, I recently started a Patreon page. So if you want to directly support me financially every month, you can subscribe to the Patreon and receive some benefits, like they got to see this video early, they got to see the intro of this video when I was working on it, they also get to see some of the updates in the future upcoming videos, they also get to decide what videos I make in the future. So if you want to join the Patreon and help me in making quality content and help prevent me from working a desk job so I can put more time into making better videos for you guys, please check out the Patreon and please consider supporting me there. Shout out to my supporters on Patreon at Jason Murray and Crossblocker for helping me get one step closer to my dream of making content full time and being financially independent and helping me make these videos better. I hope you subscribe to see more in the future. Take care of yourselves, your families, your loved ones. I love you, and I'll see you in the next one.